This video will cover main points from Unit 7 on urban development. First, we need to talk about what an urban system is. Basically, an urban system is a collection of cities. These cities tend to be interdependent of each other for economic reasons, sometimes political reasons. Diffusion is connected through the exchange of information. You'll see a flow of goods, capital, and even people. Take a look at the image here. We see many factors that make up this urban system. So in the central area, you see a large city, and on the outskirts, you see other smaller cities associated with that city. And this is really common when we look at a large county, for example. There actually might be various cities that make up that county. For example, Sacramento might be your primary central city, but yet Sacramento County would include other cities such as Rancho Cordova or Folsom. Certain types of phenomena or different situations may arise due to the structure of that system. So you may see certain themes that persist throughout different systems like segregation, industrial locations, a natural environment, as well as what is human-made or the built environment. You'll see different neighborhoods and patterns within those different neighborhoods. You'll see migration and residential mobility. You'll see cities that are getting built up for the future. You'll see exurbs that are basically extensions of the suburbs, and you'll definitely see growth as well. When dissecting the urban system, you might be analyzing different aspects of it. So you might be looking at some of the social consequences or constructs. You may be looking at political circumstances, economic circumstances, environmental circumstances. And so we may see common themes that are typical of an urban system, but we also may see major differences depending on social elements that are going on. Again, this is where we can start to get into that spatial analysis, that spatial association. So, for example, two different urban systems in different areas of the world may be comparable in size, maybe even comparable in physical environment, but have very different circumstantial situations with regard to maybe how people live. And again, there are a lot of different elements that can play into that, right? Different social dynamics, political dynamics, economic dynamics. Another concept of urbanization is what's known as the urban hierarchy, and this is typically associated with the level of population density or the number of people that reside in a particular area. So when we look at the image here, we can see down at the bottom of the pyramid, we have the smaller populations that are associated with a hamlet, a village, or a small town. As the population starts to increase, it becomes more urbanized. This is where we see differences between how we refer to areas that people reside in, whether they live in a rural area or an urban area. And the more urban regions tend to be referred to as large towns or a regional center or even a capital city. Keep in mind that as the settlement starts to increase in population size, you're going to see a greater number of services provided there. This is also where you might see many people who may be traveling more so from the rural areas into the urban areas when they need access to those services. The next concept we will cover has to do with urban models. The first model we're going to look at here is the concentric zone model. It was developed in the 1920s by Burgess, and it was the first model to explain and predict urban growth. This is originally based on urban growth in Chicago, and it suggests that a city's land use can be viewed from above as a series of concentric rings, like the rings of a tree trunk that's been cut. As the ring grows and expands, the new rings are added, and older rings change their function and their character. The rings are sometimes associated with migration, in which new arrivals to cities tend to move first into inner rings near the central business district, and then they get pushed out as people start to look for more economic activities and maybe even start to move into more suburban areas. We can actually look at the different functions of each of the rings in A, pertaining to the concentric zone model. We see in the center with the yellow at a number 1 is the central business district. Then we see the zone of transition. After that, we see the zone of independent workers' homes, and then the zone of better residences, and then the commuter zone. The zone of transition is just outside of the central business district. Sometimes it doesn't become developed because investors may see it as something that's constantly caught in shifting urban patterns. An example of this would be Skid Row in the LA area. Next, we have Hoyt's sector model. This was developed in the 1930s. And instead of rings, we actually see different sectors that extend from the central business district. In this case, land zones actually grew based on things like transportation routes. And so we actually see more linear features like roads, canals, railroads, boulevards. Those are what really dictate sectors as opposed to different rings. In addition, many factories and industrial activities followed rail lines, and the lower socioeconomic housing followed these lines of public transportation. In addition, we see a lot of visitor service sectors that tend to be located along major highways. Lastly, we can look at the multiple nuclei model. Harrison Ullman created the new model of urban growth in North American cities. And unlike the other two models that really focus on the central business district, the focal points are actually distant from the original central business district and are only loosely connected to it. Really, it suggests that there's a reduced reliance or dominance on the central business district. This model suggests that different areas are built up in chunks. So, for example, you might see a specific area that gets built up that will include industrial parks, shopping centers, housing zones, and all of those can be built in one giant sweep of construction to build a whole new area. As a result, you have multiple areas with their own nuclei or central nodes, for example. Again, not relying on the central business district. Take some time when you're studying to look over these models because they are applied differently depending on the region of the world you're looking at. So they may look differently in application to North America, to Europe, and maybe other developing regions of the world. Another contribution of urbanization has much to do with the development of transportation. In human geography, we study the different epochs of transportation or new innovations in transportation that further expanded urbanization. So as you can see, some of the earliest forms of transportation include the sail wagon. This is from 1790 to 1830. In the second wave, we see the iron horse epoch, so we see the construction of railroads. Then we see in the third wave, we've got the steel ray epoch. And then in the fourth one, we see the auto and air amenity epoch. And then currently we are in the high technology epoch. So from 1970 to present day, we see multiple automobile homes, for example, families with multiple cars. We see people traveling through air, and so they can get to a different part of the world in less than a 24-hour period, for example. At the same time, we also have rockets that can go to outer space. We have different satellites, and we can actually connect digitally, virtually. We don't necessarily have to do it physically. Keep in mind that the development of these different transportation systems also created these very large cities that are interconnected. Some examples of this would include San Francisco, New York City, Istanbul, Miami, Tokyo. All right, so the next topic is the gravity model, and it predicts the migration flows based on size of the population and the distance between two places. It's based on Newton's law of gravity, which is based on the size or the mass of two objects. The model is used to explain migration patterns, commodity flows, work commute, shopping patterns, and telephone call volume. So again, let's connect it to the two factors. We have size and we have distance. So size can be dictated by the population, right? There's more people there. If there's more people there, it might be really common to between two really largely populated areas, you're going to see that there's an increased possibility that there are going to be people who've been migrating or who have migrated from different parts of the world, that you're going to see ethnic enclaves, for example. People also might be more inclined to travel from one large city on one side of the world to another large city on a different side of the world. So again, they might be more connected than that large city may be even to a much smaller city within that same country. And then looking at distance as well. The shorter the distance, the more inclined that there's going to be a connection. The further the distance, the less inclined. But again, we've got two different factors to consider. So size by means of population, and then distance. So keep that in mind. So we can also look at the different sectors that make up an urban area. It can give us a sense, again, of level of development, as well as like how large or how dominant each sector is in the country. So we have the primary sector, which is the production of raw materials. Again, one of the common things to think about is agriculture. The secondary sector, which is the transformation of raw materials into goods, think of industrialization. The tertiary sector, which is the provision of services to consumers and businesses. So again, more of the service sector. And then the quaternary sector, which is information and environmental technology based. So again, the higher the sectors, the more developed a country may be. And then if we go to the primary and secondary sectors, we probably have countries that are still developing. Then we can also look in each area of urbanization when we're looking at the three different types of services specifically, and that's where we get into consumer services, business services, and public services. You'll more than likely see a question on the test that pertains to the difference between basic versus non-basic businesses or industries. And so if it's basic, it means that it's sold outside of the community, so it's bringing money into the community. A mine would be an example of this. Then a non-basic industry is one that sells its products within the community, so it's not going to be bringing money from outside of the community into the community. An example of this would just be businesses that tend to only serve people within that particular community. Next concept is the rank size rule versus the primate city. If we look at the rank size rule, it just means that the largest city will be much larger in comparison to the next largest city. So here we'll see the second largest city is half the size, third largest city is a third the size, fourth largest city is a quarter of the size. So this might be common in countries that have multiple big cities. In contrast, we can look to primate cities. So the largest city is the dominant city, and so dominant that you don't really see other cities that even fit into that rank size rule. Now, we don't have a whole lot of time to cover the central place theory, but it is very connected to the gravity model. So utilizing the same concepts of where people reside in an area and the likelihood that they're going to travel to a place that may offer certain services or, might be larger in size or could be shorter in distance. Those things are going to come into play when we're looking at people traveling to get to those services. And the last concept to cover here will have to do with urban problems that come as the result of urbanization. So it's going to be really important that you can work yourself through and navigate all of the different social components, political components, economic components, and environmental components that really happen as the result of urbanization. So you'll want to take some time to look at different FRQs that have to do with urbanization to really prepare for this, but be able to talk about urban sprawl, this uncontrolled expansion of urbanization, environmental pollution, land consumption, gentrification, unsustainable transportation. Again, a big theme is always going to be connected to sustainability. So you want to be able to talk through sustainability challenges, challenges with public transportation, different social relationships, the sense of community and place within an urban area, dealing with public health, Again, I can't emphasize enough environmental pollution and energy consumption as well. Okay, so just be prepared for that. But hopefully, I was able to cover some of the big topics, and good luck studying Unit 7.